The Senior Rehab Project is supported by the Game Changers, a group of motivated rehab clinicians that are crushing mediocrity and advancing care for older adults. You can join this group of people and get access to the private Facebook group, the monthly meetup with article discussions, and have a say in the direction of this movement. Get off the sidelines and get involved. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/Game Changers. Hit me!
This is a Senior Rehab Podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults. And now your host, my grandson, Dusty Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast, and thank you for the download. Today's guest is a very special guest named... Sorry, Lisa, I'll redo this again. How do you say your last name?
Cini.
Cini.
If you think C, like how you see, and then your knee.
I always forget to ask before I hit record. All right, so we'll do take two there. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Today's guest is Lisa Cini. She is an interior designer of senior living facilities with over 20 years of experience. She's also an author. Her first book, titled The Future is Here, Senior Living Reimagined, has received raving reviews and also just released her second book, which is called Hive, The Simple Guide to Multi-Generational Living, which is based on her social experiment of living in a 4-generation household with people in the house ranging from 17 to 92 years of age and the positive impact design can have in a home for seniors with dementia. She's also the founder of bestlivingtech.com. Think about sharper image meeting AARP with this site. She searches the world for the best products to embrace living as we age. Her design company, Mosaic Design Studios, is also the nation's leading provider of design services for senior living. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm excited to talk with you. I've done a few episodes on design. One of them was actually with Columbusite, Matt Martin. He works with the Kerwin Institute associated with Ohio State. And we talked about kind of the, planning cities and neighborhoods and not so much interior design, but kind of, just in the community. So I'm excited to hear your perspective on interior design.
Another Buckeye.
Yes, another Buckeye. And also I do want to bring up people, if you look up Mosaic Design Studio, you'll see that she's kind of in the heart of Columbus, Ohio. And she happens to be right across the street from one of my favorite breweries, Wolf Ridge.
Oh, I visit that that's in my backyard, so we're not going to talk about how often I visit that.
Yeah. So. I didn't mention this. I just moved from Columbus. I lived in the short north, up on kind of Summit, Fifth Avenue. Yeah, so pretty close to where you are. So that's a good spot. So I guess let's just get started with kind of give us kind of the summary of how your path has led you to being specialized in senior living design. What's your path up to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a doctor, and I was raised in a blue collar family in Canton, Ohio, and I was very good in school, but I was just kind of encouraged that wasn't in our cards with my background. And so I was a very good artist, and I took one of those tests and it said, you can be an interior designer. And I thought, that's perfect. I had won a top award for art, and I thought, I don't want to do just art. I want the logical side. So it was the blending of the right brain and the left brain. And so I set out, went to school, went to a bunch of schools, ended up graduating from the Art Institute in Dallas. And while I was there, I practiced residential design and learned that, and found out how, to work with color and people, and really decided that I wanted to focus my efforts more in the commercial zone. I am not the personality type, and you'll probably hear about this a little bit later. Like, I'm not a caregiver. I don't want to hear the really long story of how your cat got sick this morning, that kind of thing. Yeah. I'll take care of something with the cat, but I'm an action person. Yeah. So I wanted to do commercial design, and I ended up at a healthcare system in a hospital, and I was doing anything from, bone marrow transplant areas and ORs linear accelerators all the way around. And we started to realize that, I was getting people for about 3 days, and I could impact their lives for about 3 days. And we had 6,000 associates, and people would come and go. But I challenged with the fact that from a design perspective, there wasn't a ton that I could do to really impact their life. It was more about the doctors and the nurses, the therapists, the caregivers. So I looked into senior living, and I thought, wow, this is something I could do. It blends residential, but I, don't have to worry about somebody likes this color or that color. I have to worry about the science behind it, but not the personal opinion behind it. I could blend my love for healthcare and my knowledge from acute care. And then I could honor my family because I have a very long lifeline. So at one point, my children had 6 great-grandparents alive.
Oh my goodness.
Great-grandparents. So,
awesome.
I'm seeing more and more on Facebook that I have a lot of friends that'll say, oh, my Nana just died and she was 106 or she was 100 or she was 99. That used to be pretty rare.
Yeah.
And it's not rare anymore. So for my kids to have 6 great-grandparents alive, there was, I grew up being around older people and a family and a community and having to deal with those issues of how do you age in place, or do you go into a home, or can you afford it? And so I was lucky to go to work for a company that built them all over the United States and really got to experience that. And then they ended up selling, and I was encouraged by the owners to start my own company, and that was almost 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh. So quite the career. And it seems like, it's just kind of coming together in a real beautiful way, which I'm sure you probably never imagined that would happen.
Oh, no. If you would have told me this when I was, when I was like a senior in high school, I would have told you that, something was wrong with you.
Oh, that's great. So, a lot of listeners, we're clinicians. We, mainly work with patients. We, work in the facility, a lot of the facilities that you probably have designed. But I know just in my experience, I've been in places where they were, doing renovations or building a new building. And I was just kind of, not sure what was going on and just kind of out of the loop with things and just, seeing my patients. And I think that is pretty typical with a lot of clinicians. Could you kind of walk us through kind of the stages, or how do you go from, someone approaches you saying, hey, we want to build a new facility into completion? Like what are kind of the big steps in that whole process and the parties that are involved?
Yeah, sure. And it depends on the company. I mean, I work with everybody from startups to the big dogs that have, 400 homes.
Yeah.
So you would think that some of the ones that have massive amount of facilities or homes would be less involved in sometimes caring about what the on-site staff has to think. And that's not the case. It really has to do with company culture. So that's the first thing. And so I can be dealing with, 1 or 2 homes with a group, and they might not ask any other staff for their opinion. On the other hand, I could be dealing with 400 and they want me to ask everybody and their brother and then bring in focus groups. So I don't think either is a good solution. I think there's a blend. You can't have too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And you also, when you're too siloed, you don't get to grow, right? You don't get to learn and hear other people's perspective. And part of having me and my team in is that we've worked all over the world, and we don't have the perfect, recipe that everybody can duplicate, but we can figure out the right recipe for you. And that comes with, a little bit like therapy, right? You got to understand the body. You can't just apply the same principle to, a guy that's 6'4" to me that's 4'11" and 100, pounds. You have to work it differently. And so you have to look at all those different things. So we would start off, because I was in-house at the large senior living company, we start off with the budget and the mission, vision, and values. And we call that a clarity compass. So we want to identify, like, what do you say is successful a year from now when we're done with this project? And if you can't define that, then we probably shouldn't be working with you, because you're just throwing money at something and everybody's going to be frustrated and upset.
That's a good point.
So we define those things, and then we use them as a strainer. I always like to make everybody kind of get me down to 3. I'm a very, Trinity kind of person, and 3 is the magic number. And so give me 3 things. Somebody will always say, well, it's safety. Well, not really. Do you want to put somebody in a rubber room and they're safe? You always have to balance that, and you have to challenge those things. And then once you identify those values, I can make decisions and strain it through that strainer. I can say, yeah, we identified that dignity and independence is way more important than safety. That means we're going to do some things that we're going to have take some risks on. But this is more important to us than having everything, bulletproof and rubber roomed.
Yeah.
So,
that's a good point.
So we walk through those things, and then we do something called a collaborative blueprint, where it's very different than other firms and other companies out there. And this was created when I was in the hospital system. I created this system because I got really tired of moving down the road, and then I might be 6 months or 8 months down the road, and they decide to have in the therapy group or the doctors or the anesthesiologist, and there was critical information that I was never given. And now we've invested all this time and money, and maybe the plans are done, the HVAC, the structure's done. To go back and redo it is almost impossible.
Yeah.
You can do it, but it's going to cost money. And then the folks that were just invited to the table feel like it was lip service because you can't listen to them because you're too far down the road. So what I've devised in this collaborative blueprint is, you're going to have everybody that you want at the table: the maintenance guy, the therapist, the marketing person, a resident, advocate, operations, finance, construction, purchasing, whoever you need at the table. And they're going to have the ability to challenge and sign off on this all the way through. But we're going to do it a lot more like jury duty than we are going to do it like a linear fashion. So everybody's going to agree. Everybody doesn't have to like everything, but they all have to agree, because great design involves compromise. So once we do that, then we, do all the specifications. And if we follow that process, it's pretty darn successful. Most of the parties, we are able to meet the mission, vision, and values. We're able to communicate that to the team. And it's not perfect, it never is, right? But everyone knows we did the best that we could with what we had.
So with, say, like a facility opens, the staff, they're in there working, they're caring for people. And, I just think of some facilities I've been in where I'm like, why did they do this? Why did they put this here? Why did they, do this type of carpet, just very critical. And that's coming from a very uninformed position. But I'm curious, what do you want staff, or let's say physical therapists, to know? What do you wish they knew whenever they go, back to work or work in these new facilities? Just about, all that you've done and all that you've thought about. Like, what do you wish they knew?
One, we do an in-service, so we try to talk to everyone and tell them why we did what we did. Again, not everybody's going to agree with everything, but as long as you're, aligned on the mission, that helps you get where you could get. I think one of the things is that this is still people's home. I mean, if you're in a short-term rehab, of course not. But I was in acute care. And so I know by code what you can and can't do, and you can do carpet in acute care. So, you're not going to try and, tell me that the code says you can't do that, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And with that, I've done a lot of research over in Italy. I spent a summer in Italy looking at how they do the rehab, looking at how they age in place. And one of the wonderful things is that therapy is the most important item, but it's different than how we do it in the U.S. How we do it in the U.S. is very similar to how our healthcare system is. You go in, you're sick, and it's sick care. You prescribe a pill or a therapist or whatnot, but it's not well care. So Europe does well care, which means as I'm older, I'm still going to go and do all those steps. I'm not going to move to a ranch house just because I'm older.
Mm.
So I'm going to challenge my body every day before it gets to the point where it breaks. And then I have to have a professional come in and build up my muscles and my strength and my core back. So when we're in the homes, especially in short-term rehab, I want environments that are as safe as possible for them to be able to, gain their strength back and become more independent. But they have to be able to successfully transition back home.
Mm.
So if they have this perfect ADA compliant, zero transition surface, especially in flooring, which I hear people saying all the time, you can't do this, you can't do this. I'm like, what's going to happen the minute they walk into their house and they've got the plush carpet and they've got the transition and they've got the steps and they've got the tub? An ADL unit can help if somebody stays in that, and I really promote that. But what really are they going to do? How successful are they going to be?
Right.
Even if they don't come back to you, are they going to be miserable and really struggle and feel like a failure when they go home? And feel like it's kind of like if you're sick and you think you're really well, you've stayed home a couple days, and then you go back to work and you're just wiped out by noon, right?
Right.
And you thought, gosh, I thought I was 100% back. So I feel like residents or patients, when they go back home, especially, they aren't given enough tools to be able to properly integrate back home successfully. Mm. For those that are staying in skilled nursing or assisted living, Alzheimer's, dementia, that's their home. So we need to make it as residential as possible without, it's not exactly like we're trying to throw trick questions with the interior design for somebody to maneuver. But there are certainly, things that help them to be able to do more. I mean, the interior design studies show that people don't fall because of transitions or steps. People generally fall because their drop foot has not been addressed. Their eyeglasses are off. The medications are wrong. They're getting up in the middle of the night and they're disoriented. There's magazines or cords on the floor or a pet. Those are typically the reasons.
That's a good point. I think all the home health clinicians that are listening are saying thank you. Just because we do, come across so many of those situations where someone has been in, short-term rehab facility or, just a hospital, acute care hospital. And they're like, oh, you're good to go home. And then they come home and they're like, I don't know how ready I am for this.
Exactly.
We see that too much. So Melissa Clabe, she's a listener to the podcast, but she also has a really cool website. Are you an NPR fan by chance?
I am.
You heard of the show called All Things Considered?
Yes, I love that show.
Her website is All's Things Considered, so ALZ thingsconsidered.com. Cool. She was recently on the show. The website is about what she's learned about caring for her mother who has early onset Alzheimer's. Really, it's a heart-wrenching story, but I mean, she shares a lot of helpful tips. So she asks you, she mentioned that she read in your bio that you stayed for days at a time in the facilities that you designed where the residents themselves lived. Melissa would love to know what you learned by staying there, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, hi, Melissa, and love what you're doing. So this was not by choice. Let's just start there. Interior design, you're always supposed to do immersive design, but you become director of design and you think when you're traveling around and you're doing work and you're in 27 different states, you're like, I just want to go to my hotel room, right?
Yeah.
But my mentor and the owner of the company, Rick Slager, said, no, every person will stay in the home. And for as long as you need to be there, you need to stay there. And sometimes the homes were open, sometimes they were not. I can tell you that probably the number one lesson that I learned is that Alzheimer's and dementia folks they're a lot like kids and there's no filters. So I was helping with an activity and I was told bluntly by the majority of them that I should not sing ever in public. And I'm like, wow, okay, thanks That's for funny. That. I mean, it still hurts. You can feel it, right? That was 20 some years ago. That still hurts. But so you learn a lot what the goods and the bads are. I'll give a great example. So we had, I had thought, I'll give you two. back in the day, we had supplied resident room furniture for everybody. And then we realized that for Alzheimer's dementia, we wanted to, encourage people to bring their own stuff so that they could be more comfortable as it was their home. But at the beginning, we would supply it like a hotel package. And the operations staff and maintenance staff was coming to me and saying, you've got to do something, Lisa. There's incontinence issues and these mattresses are getting trashed and we're having to buy new ones all the time. And we had 100 and some homes across the country. And I'm like, okay. So I went and did the research and I found this kind of plastic covering that could go on top of the mattresses, like cover the mattresses. And it was a moisture barrier. Fantastic. Operations was happy. Maintenance was happy. And then I went out and stayed in the home. It was the worst night of sleep I've ever had in my life. So I crinkled, I cracked, the heat built up. It was just miserable. And here I was responding to staff. They had a legitimate issue. It wasn't, it was for the betterment of the resident and the home. And it was a viable solution. But the actual, kind of practice of it, the live version was horrible. And that's one of those places where we had to figure out, what do we care about more? Do we care about the cost of replacing it, or do we care about the residents' happiness and being able to sleep every night? And so we stopped utilizing those from that event. Another one was we had one person get scalded, not bad, by the temperature. They didn't realize how hot the water was. And so we ended up putting temperature controls on all the showers and all the faucets and all the resident rooms, right? It's a great solution, Gosh, we're brilliant. Aren't we cool? And I was staying in a home and it was 3-story. And, seniors require, a lot more heat because they lose, I think it's somewhere around 70% of less fat than, someone in their 20s. So able to, maintain their body core temperature, they have to have more heat. And that's why we'll do heat lamps in a shower room and that kind of thing. So I'm like that. I'm low blood pressure. I get in the shower and I cannot get the water hot enough to even keep me warm during the shower. I'm miserable. And then I get out, and this happened to be before we were doing the heat lamps. I couldn't get warm enough there. And it was because it was on the 3rd floor and the temperature was great on the 1st, a little bit worse on the 2nd. But by the time it got to the 3rd, it was miserable.
Wow, man.
And we didn't take that into consideration.
Yeah.
So, those are two, I think you learn so much more by making mistakes. And anyone that tells you that they're, an expert and haven't failed, I never lose. I think that old saying is, I might always win, but I never lose, because I always grow, and I grow a lot more from the mistakes that I make.
Yeah. Man, that whole, that term immersive design, I think that's very applicable to what we do as well. I mean, I guess you could say it about any field, but I mean, it just makes me think of some of the assumptions that we'll make or things that we'll recommend or prescribe without really experiencing them ourselves and realizing how they may not be appropriate, for that patient. And a classic example, and this is something I talk about probably way too much, is, I mean, you may have had experience with this, but we'll give, home exercise programs to patients. And, sometimes, especially in home health, there may be an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, speech therapist, nursing, all these different disciplines going into the home. And each discipline is going to prescribe a home exercise program to this patient. So just imagine, someone in their, 80s to 90s, they get a bout of pneumonia, they're sick, they may be a little disoriented with changes of medication and infection and whatnot. Then they come home having a tough time caring for themselves. They have all these strangers come in, and each of them tells them, you need to do these 10 to 12 exercises, 3 times a day. And they just end up with, stacks of paper of stick figure drawings. And it's almost comical. Like when you actually take it in and think about, man, this is absolutely insane. And then I think about the immersive part. Like, what if we actually perform these? I think if therapists actually perform the exercise programs they prescribe, we'd probably cut the exercises in half.
Oh, sure.
I almost guarantee.
Sure. I mean, well, when my mom and dad were going right before, they were going to move in with me, one of the things was they were looking at a ranch. And I came from the background that the home that I worked in, the corporate, their philosophy is if you came in a wheelchair in 2 weeks, they'd have you on a walker. And if you came with a walker, 2 weeks, they'd have you on a cane. And cane, 2 weeks, they'd have you using the handrail. That a lot of it was about muscle. And the more that you don't exercise and move, the worse everything degrades. And I think John Hopkins has some studies on that. There's tons out there. So when they moved in, the first thing I said was, you're going to move upstairs and you're going to do steps. And they were not happy about this, let me tell you. And they had, we had 6 total knee replacements in our house. So my grandmother and my 2 parents, and they said, we can't do that. And I said, I said, it's funny, but if I didn't know what I know, you would be like just, giving me a line of bull, because I know the first thing a therapist is going to do is put you on the stairs.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not, and I also know that most people don't fall on stairs. So, if you can do the stairs every day, that is exercise. That's therapy. And to a large extent, I think if therapists would do it more normal, like, hey, I want you to fold your clothes every day.
Right.
I want you to go up and down the stairs. And if you could apply the exercises to their daily living activities and merge those two together instead of compounding what they have to do, I think it would be, you'd have a lot better chance of success.
Yeah. I think occupational therapists, a lot of them do a great job of that. I think physical therapists, we tend to struggle in that department. I mean, I have met several clinicians that are really good at that application of, not framing it as a exercise per se, but a task or, a particular activity that the person's actually interested in. But that I would not say that's the norm for sure. It's a lot of just random, limb flailing with a band or weights on.
Understood. With seeing my parents, and my mom had rotator cuff and she had back surgery. And so seeing all of that, it was interesting. It was awesome. Let's go there. I mean, without the therapy, they wouldn't be where they are today. And they're in much better shape than they were when they were living by themselves. And that has very little to do with me as much as it has to do with accountability and attitude. But there is some common sense things. I remember seeing my 99-year-old grandfather sitting in a chair, and he would stick his hands out in front of him 100 times a day, out to the side 100, and over in his head 100, and flex his fingers. And this is all from his recliner, and then lift up his legs, each of them 100 times. And I thought, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing my exercises. And I thought, he is crazy, and now I realize, I'm like, he was getting the lymph moving, the blood flowing, he was doing all the things that he really should have been doing.
Yeah.
And he was doing it naturally.
Yeah, that's awesome. From the recliner.
From the recliner, yes.
That's cool. All right, well, I want to transition and talk a little bit about your books. So you've got a couple. The Future is Here, Senior Living Reimagined, and then Hive, which is pretty new. So Hive is a simple guide to multi-generational living. So I want to start with The Future is Here. So that book, when did that book come out?
2016, I think.
2016. Okay, so you spent a lot of time writing that book. You probably started that, several years ago and published it in 2016. I'm curious, if you could rewrite that book today, what would you add and what would you remove?
That's an awesome question. And I actually am rewriting that book today.
Oh, man.
So you are, it's, and just so you know, we didn't talk about this before.
Right.
This is off the cuff. So the new version is going to be called Boom, because what I found was that, first of all, it was when I wrote the book, I wrote it for my clients. I was just so frustrated that there was all this great technology out there. And when I say technology, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily something that plugs in. Okay.
Okay.
Always give an example of great technology that I saw over in Germany. It was in a pharmacy, and on the shopping cart, every shopping cart had a magnifying glass that was built into it so that people could see their prescriptions.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
So that's technology. If you have a tool that helps you, it's technology, and it doesn't always mean electronics. And I think we get kind of caught up in the fact that that's what it means. So I was frustrated at the level of, it was basically like still wanting to use a horse when you've got a Model T that you could be doing things with, or using an outhouse when you've got indoor plumbing. And then they would say, well, we have Wi-Fi. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic. And I thought the baby boomers are not going to rest. And I was able to be in these mastermind groups and think tanks and see all this stuff coming, and then see what Lowe's was doing. And I thought, everybody wants this. So it was written towards the owner. Mm-hmm. But when I started I never intended on selling any of them. I just intended on giving them out and kind of making people listen to my message, really. And it went up on Amazon, and it was like, all of a sudden 800 books were sold. And I'm like, what? And they were all over the place.
Wow.
And then they were to baby boomers. They weren't my clients. And I thought, wow, this is a message that, people want to know about. So I'm rewriting it because some of the technology has moved so fast ahead of where I wrote it when I was doing the research and the speeches on it. And others, I think, are kind of falling off. So I'll give you an example of the stuff that I'm going to be adding is more about the Internet of Things, IoT, which when I wrote this, no one really knew or was doing it. In the last 6 months, Amazon, Google, Apple have all come into the game with their own huge packages.
Yeah.
And really, when I wrote the book, GE had, I got to interview all these really cool people. GE had this 2025 home, and they talked about sensor technology and how it would work in the home and really tie together. But they were looking at 25 years out.
Man.
And
that's wild.
Right. And they were really focused on this multi-generational, which was interesting. They saw that the numbers were creeping up, and they saw that dad or mom might be living with you. They also were focused on just-in-time delivery. And I think that they hit that nail on the head with Amazon.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not sure that they knew it was Amazon at that point, but how to do that. And that spaces needed to be more flexible. So I think GE really did a great job. And now there's a lot of things out there that are going to make everything more flexible, but also connected. So you're no longer actually going to have a TV or a refrigerator or a computer or a cell phone or a printer. Everything's just going to be portals for all your information and device and how you live. So if your refrigerator is designed in such a way that the backside is to the outside of the house and it's a secure portal that Amazon can deliver all your groceries and put them into your refrigerator.
Oh my gosh. That's a game changer.
And it is a game changer. And that the refrigerator notifies, which they already do this right now, but it doesn't get delivered into your refrigerator, notifies, Kroger or Amazon that you need certain things or the pharmacy, and it delivers it. That'll change. If from a safety and security standpoint, Sensor Home out of Europe basically has flooring. It's still too expensive, but I can see this in every home. A flooring that basically calculates everyone's weight that's supposed to be in the home. And if somebody comes in the wrong weight, if your grandmother or your mother is staying by herself, it'll automatically send an alert to whoever you want. Or it can also tell if she's fallen or she's just sitting on the ground. It can keep doors shut that she shouldn't go in if she's starting to get dementia.
Gosh. So that's on a whole nother level than anything I've been exposed to. in terms of how far this technology can go. That's wild. So
It is.
are there any in Columbus, have you been in any homes that are really pushing the brink in this space?
You know, we do have a living laboratory here with Rosemarie Rossetti, but it's more about universal design versus technology.
Okay.
And from a technological standpoint, I would say possibly Les Wexner, who owns Victoria's Secret. You know, I've always heard the stories about how his dining room goes into, I don't know whether it's true or not. I wasn't there, but, you know, you hear these stories about how the dining room table goes down into the floor and, you know, gets cleared and then comes back up as people are in the other room. You know, there's really tricked out houses in Columbus. How I think the aging in place component is not quite there yet. And I think it's a new industry, but it's going to go so fast. We're going to start off with everything being super duper, connected with Amazon and your refrigerator and your locks, you know, the locks on your door and the cameras, temperature control with Nest. So all of those things are happening right now in the homes in Columbus, and I know around the country. But I'm not seeing the 3D printed food, the flooring that has sensor technology to it, gamification, which I think all therapists should be using. I'm not seeing that in the residential homes yet.
Yeah. Man, that's wild. My first, I guess, introduction to a lot of this stuff is actually, I mean, probably 7 or 8 blocks from where your studio is. So it was kind of that new, I wouldn't say high rise, but, you know, it's right by the side of Mile Park. That, you know, they built all those condos, and I was seeing someone in that building, and the daughter was very tech savvy. She was very invested in the care of her mother and just went all in on researching, you know, what she could do to best serve her mother. And she got all these motion sensor cameras and pressure sensing socks and all this stuff that would tell her what's going on. And it was really helpful because her mother, you know, would wander around throughout, you know, all hours of the day, and it'd just give her peace of mind. And that just blew me away. And now to hear what you're saying, and especially like with the refrigerator, like that's insane. Just think of like all the implications that'll have, especially for a lot of the listeners who almost, you know, tons of their patients, you know, get Meals on Wheels, and they have to get up, answer the door. And that's probably one of the most frightening moments during the day for a lot of people when they have to go let that person in to get their meal, especially if they're having a tough time walking. But yeah.
So if it's in a,
awesome
you know, kind of a secure way. I mean, that's why I created Best Living Tech, was that I saw there was like this massive hole in home technology to be able to let somebody age in place.
Yeah.
So everything that, you know, I'm doing, I'm putting up there and I'm trialing out. And some of the things haven't worked out so great, you know, and I'm like, wow, this was a major failure, or I wasn't able to really figure out how to work it. So I don't know how somebody else would. But, you know, the bidet toilet seats, I mean, that was the best thing ever. And I'll tell you what, that's one of those things kind of that it doesn't just apply towards anyone aging in place. I think it's one of those things that's great for anybody. And I think that's the real win, is that a lot of this is great for everybody.
That's a good point. And I think that kind of circles back to with my buddy, Matt Martin, that's not too far from where you are right now. I mean, that whole podcast was about universal design and just thinking, like you just mentioned, well, what's good for older adults is typically good for everybody. And kids and vice versa.
Totally. He would know that. So when they did all the curb cuts for wheelchairs and all your sidewalks, everybody's like, why are they spending all this money on this? How many wheelchair people do we have in our neighborhood? Blah, 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 blah. How many people use those for their bikes, for their strollers? I mean, it has been such a benefit for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So listeners, if that little bit intrigued you, I'd definitely check out bestlivingtech.com. You'll find a lot of links to some of the things that Lisa was mentioning, and the book that'll be coming out. When do you have an idea of when that'll be published, or you still?
The Boom book will probably be within a year. So I would say 2018. I haven't made the commitment to release a book a year, but it seems like that's what I'm starting to do. Yeah, I don't know if once I get it done, it's kind of like once you finish your house and it's all renovated, you're like, oh, okay, what's the next gig?
Right.
So, but I think part of it is that you realize that technology is changing so fast, with robots and data mining and artificial intelligence and lighting, and the sensors and wearable. I mean, gamification is just enormous. So all the things that are, that were happening a couple years ago when I wrote the book have just exponentially come so far. Like you said, what new things? Virtual reality and augmented reality are just something that I really didn't buy off on in the beginning.
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing such huge benefits to folks.
Man, that's wild. Yeah, I'll be excited to look for that. So I guess in the meantime, I'll just read The Future Is Here.
Yeah, I will tell you, it's all still relevant.
Yeah,
it's still good. It has a lot of, it's got a lot of meat there. It's enough to whet your appetite in all the different areas.
Right.
And then we've got some, links and bonuses and that kind of thing to help you out.
Yeah, awesome. So a link to that will be in the show notes, folks. So I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to hit on your newest book, Hive. So can you kind of just describe your current living situation to give people some context?
So to give people context, if you're just joining the show, or I have a company, I have a couple companies, but for almost 20 years, I've had Mosaic Design Studio, and we design senior living and Alzheimer's environments worldwide. We're award-winning. We do a great job. The team is fantastic. These are like beautiful, four-season hotels with services. So private pay, not inexpensive, maybe $3,500 a month to $12,000 a month. So, you would think that, my mom and dad and grandma, when they needed that, would want to go in. Well, first of all, they didn't. They're like 90% of the other folks out there, even that their daughter or granddaughter did it. Secondly, quite frankly, I can't afford it. I've got 2 kids in college, and that's a lot of out-of-pocket money. When you start to think about 3 older individuals, and at a minimum, $30,000 to $40,000 a year out of pocket, that's a lot of money per person. So when we needed to figure out what we were going to do, and my mom and dad had always helped me with the kids as I was, growing the company, we moved them in with us. And that was 3.5 years ago. And my grandmother's 95 right now, and she's got dementia. And then my mom and dad are in their late 70s. We've got, 6 total knee replacements, a rotator cuff surgery, 5 back surgeries, macular degeneration, hearing issues. And then when they moved in, I had 2 kids in high school and my husband. So that's our hive. And then we have chickens and bees and things like that too.
What part of town are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
Bexley.
Okay, man. Yeah. Chickens in Bexley. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're a hipster community, So we get fresh eggs every day, which is really a great therapy for my mom and dad. Yeah. They go down there and feed the chickens every day and bring back the eggs. And just that simple motion of, my dad goes to work every day. He's 79, but my mom is the primary caregiver for my grandmother. Just her getting out the house in any weather and going down, feeding the chickens, getting the eggs, letting the dogs in and out is great therapy. So that's my current living situation. And in doing that, they graciously allowed me to experiment on them. Like, what kind of products do I want to try out that maybe my clients didn't think that their residents or patients would be okay with, or that I just had a hunch on. And so I've been experimenting on them with all kinds of technology and different things. And then I wrote about it. And then I, also kind of tell you how we renovated the house, which was very minor to be able to accommodate them. And so that anybody in that situation, just little things that in my 30 plus years of design, 20 some years of senior living design, like if I was going to come into your house, what would I tell you to do that would help you or help your family member? And then some kind of really neat stories and outcomes, the chicken soup part of the book that come out of living in a multi-generational family and connecting and, you know, how that works out.
Man, that's so cool. I'm going to be selfish from the home health perspective. You know, I go into lots of people's homes. Some people have, ample amounts of care. They have invested family. They have all their needs met, which is great. But the majority of patients that I work with, and probably many of the listeners, that's not necessarily the case. And I'm not an interior designer. You know, there's some things that we learn in school and that you pick up on the job in terms of what is a good thing or what may be a bad thing. But could you kind of, we'll wrap up with this question, but can you give us just a few basic principles that you think we should have on the front of our minds when we walk into someone's home when we're providing care for them?
Well, I think the first thing is to look and see if there's any clutter. Clutter is not helpful for anyone, especially with eyesight issues or with mobility issues or cognitive issues. So, especially when someone's living in their home for a long time, clutter accumulates. And that might be magazines, that might be tchotchkes, that might be, rugs on top of rugs because it's getting dirty right in front of the recliner. And then it becomes a trip hazard. So minimizing the clutter and decluttering. Making it easier for somebody to function. And I give the analogy that I use something called the LOVE method, which is light, optimize, visual, and ease. So, if you're traveling to some place that you've never traveled before, and it might be LA or Dallas or something like that, and it's an 8-lane highway, and there's all different signs telling you which way to go, it's very confusing and very hard. And sometimes once you figure out where you're supposed to go, you might make a quick turn and get in a wreck, actually, which is a lot of times how people fall and get hurt. But if you're on one highway, there's 2 lanes, there's only one exit, you see road postings that say, hey, in 5 miles, you're going to get off on the left, and 3 miles and 2 miles. It's a lot easier to maneuver and be safe and be independent. So the home should be like that. And that's what I mean by optimize. You want to decrease choices so it increases independence. You want to have a ton of light. At least for my grandmother, who's 95, she grew up in the Depression era. She is fanatical about saving energy. So she will turn off lights everywhere. And the only way to get around this, because she needs 70% more light than a 24-year-old, right, to see properly, is for me to have lights that are on maybe a sensor that if she's out of the room, it automatically turns off. Or when she comes in, it automatically turns on. And then to that, we'll, do a light that will emulate natural light, which helps her with her circadian cycle. The other thing is contrast. So I want to have a contrast between my horizontal and my vertical surfaces.
Okay.
So if I have a contrast between my floor and my wall, it's a lot easier to see where the wall is and where I should be walking. Right before the steps start, I should have a landing, or I should have a strip that might be you can even get like duct tape that's colored. That tells me the step is there. Or putting a little night light at the top of that step. Railings. I see railings on a lot of houses, but I see them painted out the same color as the wall. Well, then you don't have any contrast. So it's not easy to see or grab. Anything that reduces your brain's ability to be able to quickly assess a situation causes issues with how well the neuromapping takes place in the body and your balance.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, and then the other thing is that, I don't know. I know you have auditory therapists, but a lot of physical therapists and occupational therapists forget about, or not maybe forget about, it's just not a primary thing that they're taught. It's more of a specialty. That sound makes a huge impact. And if you have a mismatch between your eyes and your ears, that causes a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And most seniors have hearing issues.
Yeah.
So those are just some keys.
That's a big one. And that is super helpful. I do have a roll of pink duct tape in my bag that's been helpful for several situations, but that's really cool to think about. I love the, pun intended, I love the love method. So that was light,
optimize, visual, and ease.
And ease. Okay. Right.
Ease is like, having the landing, having the handrail being contrasting, having one single faucet versus two levers, those kinds of things.
That's awesome. All right, folks, if this conversation intrigued you at all, I highly encourage you to check out the book. So Hive, The Simple Guide to Multi-Generational Living, and then The Future is Here, Senior Living Reimagined. Links to those will be in the show notes. Lisa, sorry, I'm going to ask you one more selfish question.
Oh, sure.
This is not related whatsoever. I'm going to be headed up your way in a few weeks to the new IKEA up in Polaris. I'm curious. I haven't got to ask any, a professional, designer, interior designer. What's your opinion on IKEA?
IKEA is, besides Disney, which Walt Disney is the master manipulator that can have you waiting in line for 2 hours and you're happy about it. IKEA is the next master manipulator. So they have figured out how to take interior flow and space planning and force you to engage in the space. Actually, it's really similar. I never thought about this before, but it is so similar to what we do in a memory care environment. That you get in and you get so distracted that you don't get irritated and you just enjoy the whole process. And you're like, oh my gosh, I came in at 9 and it's already lunch. Well, what do you know? I'm at the restaurant.
Some meatballs.
Yeah, exactly. So it is, it's fantastic. I will say that the quality of the product is very high. A lot of people think that it's junk. It's not. It's a very high quality product, where they've figured out how to still have quality and still have low cost is by packing. The majority of product that you buy, the cost is in the shipping and the packing. And because everything's knocked down and you have to go through the effort of building it, that's how they're able to leverage a high quality product at a low price. So I'm a big IKEA fan. Now, I would say don't ever go in there if you just need to grab something and get out.
Yeah.
Because you might have a nervous breakdown, Right. But other than that, I think it's they do exactly what they promise they're going to do.
Yeah. Sorry, that was completely random, but I'm really excited to go to the store. The product alone, but just how they space out the store, the different things that they use to, just maximize the flow and just that whole design of that space. I'm excited,
and they also, they show you how beautiful that it can work and in small spaces.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's
all
fantastic.
Right.
Dustin, I wanted to make sure that to all your listeners out there that for you, if they go to bestlivingtech.com and type in rehab 10 as a coupon code, they're going to get 10% off. And we have the most incredible state-of-the-art grab accessories, which are like really cool handrails for all the clients out there, bidet toilet seats, hearing aids. Just if you think AARP meets Sharper Image, the best curated tech that I've personally trialed out and use in our Hive.
That's so cool. Awesome. Well, Lisa, it's greatly appreciated. I know, I gained a lot from this conversation. The listeners did as well. All the links will be in the show notes. The coupon code to Best Living Tech will be there as well. So just thank you for your time and being sharing this information, because this is something that typically, I haven't really seen a lot of this on the internet or interacting with people, but your work is greatly appreciated, and just to allow people like me to kind of get in your brain and understand how you think of space and design is just it's a really neat thing to be able to do. So it's appreciated.
Thank you. And thank you so much. And for all the therapists, I could never do what you all do. And it has been life-changing for my parents and my grandmother and our family exponentially. And I just want to say thanks for that.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you only listen to these podcast episodes, you are missing out on 90% of the Senior Rehab Project. Hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com where you can join the movement that's advancing care for older adults. You can join for free or become a part of the Game Changers where you can get some free gear and access to our monthly meetup. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.